Thank you very much, and apologies to everybody for being late. That's my fault. I've just been visiting somebody who's had a stroke, an unexpected stroke, so I've just come from there, but they are well and recovering. So good afternoon, members, officers, any members of the public viewing the live stream, and welcome to this meeting of the Climate Change and Environment Advisory Committee. My name is Councillor Pippa Halings. I'm the chair of the committee, and my vice chair today is Councillor Jeff Harvey, and I'll introduce the other attendees when I invite them to speak. Those in the chamber are reminded that the meeting is being live streamed. And may I ask those who are joining us remotely to ensure that their camera and microphone remain off unless they're addressing the committee. And for those of us present in the room, please ensure your microphone is close to you and you're speaking clearly when addressing the room. So I think if we go straight into apologies for absence.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Two apologies for absence today, one from Councillor Dr. Martin Khan and another from Councillor Bunty Waters. Councillor Peter Fane has kindly joined us as a substitute today. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And for declarations of interest, do any members have any interests to declare in relation to any item of business on this agenda? No? That's fine. And if any interest does subsequently become apparent in the meeting, please can you raise it at that point of the agenda? Thanks very much. So we'll go straight into minutes of the previous meeting, and thank you for the minutes that have been taken there, which is on the 13th of February 2024. Do any members wish to make any amendments to the minutes? Again, no. Good, so can I take approval of these minutes by affirmation, members? Wonderful, thank you very much. So those have been taken as a correct record of the meeting on the 24th of February. We'll move straight into the agenda, and we have a weighty item, which is agenda item 6, the Greater Cambridge Air Quality Strategy. And here, we as the committee are being invited to recommend to the lead cabinet member for environmental services and licensing that the joint Greater Air Quality Strategy be adopted in partnership with Cambridge City Council. And so I'm inviting one of the officers. Hello, yes, thank you very much, to help present the strategy itself, which is one that we've in principle approved in our meeting around this. And yeah, an amazing piece of work, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Halings, for the introduction. Yeah, I'm Matthew Axton, Scientific Officer, and I'm just going to do a verbal introduction to the report. I gave quite a comprehensive presentation last time, so I thought I'd go slightly easier on you this time. And so the report before you today follows on from the report presented to this committee on the 7th of December 2023, where the principles of a joint South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge City, or a Greater Cambridge Air Quality Strategy, was presented, as was the principle of adopting the World Health Organization guidelines as long-term targets, with more achievable interim targets for the lifetime of this strategy. Since the December 2023 committee, the draft Greater Cambridge Air Quality Strategy has been finalised and consulted on, with the results of that consultation presented in the report before you today. The results of the consultation were that the majority of respondents agreed with the objectives of the strategy and with the adoption of the WHO guideline values. There were those that disagreed, and those reasons for those disagreements are summarised in the report. The key priority of infrastructure improvements was clearly the most important to the majority of respondents, with awareness raising the least important. Almost half of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that the actions within the action plan would deliver the objectives of the strategy. However, a significant proportion gave a neutral response to this question, and from the corresponding written responses, it inferred that members of the public taking the survey didn't feel they had sufficient information to make this judgment. When asked what factors impacted people's day-to-day air quality. Vans, lorries and cars came out as the highest factors, although over a third of respondents also said that vehicle idling and domestic burning impacted their day-to-day lives. Only half of respondents were aware that the council's presented air quality information on our websites, and we acknowledge that better promotion of the monitoring work that we do is required, with a need to present results of that monitoring in an easily digestible and public-friendly manner. It was positive that a large proportion of respondents already undertake action to improve air quality, and many would like to take more actions with appropriate support. So following the consultation, the draft strategy was finalised with a number of minor amendments, so one of which was renaming Key Priority 1 from Policy and Development Control to Regulatory Policies and Development Control, with greater emphasis on some of the regulatory activities we undertake outside of the planning regime. So the final Greater Cambridge Air Quality Strategy is presented here within the report. Just as a reminder, the strategy has three main objectives. So continue to meet and deliver all legislative and policy requirements associated with air quality. Continue to improve air quality across Greater Cambridge, enhancing the health of those living, working and visiting Greater Cambridge. Work towards World Health Organization Air Quality Guideline annual averages as long-term targets, with interim targets for delivery within the lifetime of this strategy. And these objectives are supported by four key priorities. Key Priority 1, regulatory policies and development control. 2, infrastructure improvements. 3, community engagement and promotion. And 4, monitoring. And each of these key priorities is underpinned by a number of actions in the action plan, which is included as Appendix B of the strategy, or slightly confusingly, Appendix C of this SEAC report. The strategy was endorsed by Cambridge City Council Environment and Community Scrutiny Committee on the 21st of March of this year. And so the recommendation, as Councillor Halings has already said, is for this committee to recommend to the lead cabinet member to adopt the Greater Cambridge Air Quality Strategy. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And I also note that, we have in the annex to the strategy and the report that you provided, the differentiation between the actions which are relevant to City and which are relevant to South Cambridgeshire. And that's something that was discussed in the committee here as well, I think in December, that there are differences. And so it's good to see those, those laid out there in the report too. So members, any questions or comments that will lead us to a decision of recommendation or not? Councillor Peter Fane.
Thank you, Chair. I'm particularly interested in the section relating to bonfires, particularly paragraphs 23 to 25. I found it interesting that the response was not particularly different in rural areas, i.e. in South Cambs rather than in City. But I'm not quite sure whether there's sufficient distinction between bonfires burning of plastic, which should be covered by the Environmental Protection Act and is frequently a problem on building sites and so on, or occasionally, and bonfires, particularly on farms, of, for instance, cuttings from clearance of trees or cutting hedgerow. There is a need on some farms to burn items that are not covered by the Environmental Protection Act. And I'm just wondering whether we've made sufficient allowance for that in our strategy.
Can you just give the reference again? Because I'd had a different interpretation of the report when I read it.
The section on bonfires that I was referring to was paragraph 22 on page 13 onwards, which is the response of SCDC residents as compared with City residents at paragraph 23 that I was referring to.
Yeah, Matthew?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fane. Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't think the strategy goes into quite enough detail to sort of set out our full position with regards to how we deal with different types of bonfires, but we do treat them differently, and we do react to them differently. So you're quite right that bonfires on farms and in agricultural areas in certain circumstances are allowed. We do get complaints about those, and when we do get complaints, we do go out and speak to the farmers. We give them advice on how to minimise the impact of those burning events. But yes, obviously, as you say, they are legal, and so we can't stop them. Yeah, burning on, for example, a building site and burning plastics and things like that is a very different matter. And yes, we would deal with that in a different manner, depending on the severity of the case. Improper disposal of trade waste is something that is also dealt with by the Environment Agency, so we would work with our partners at the Environment Agency to try and deal with that. Obviously, building sites come and go, so it's something that we're constantly having to kind of think about and adapt to. But yeah, they are two different things that are dealt with in two different ways, and hopefully that answers your question.
Councillor Peter Finn, are you satisfied?
Thank you for the answer.
Councillor Dr. Timmy Hawkins.
Thank you, Chair. I found it a bit concerning, page 17, looking at the results that we got, that there were 327 responses, of which only 54. If I put my glasses on, I can read it properly. 54 were from South Cambs. I don't know why. Do we have any idea why? And if that's the case, does that not mean then that there's a skewing of the implications or the results that we might draw from the consultation as to the application within South Cambs itself?
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So yes, 327 responses is considered quite a good response to a survey of this nature, and you're right that there were a lot more for Cambridge City than there were for the district. I think by its very nature, air quality is an issue that is more pronounced in the city because of the greater number of traffic and the more concentration of traffic. So I think it is something that resonates more with city residents. So we did do some analysis on some of the questions about, especially those that particularly relevant to either city or the district. For example, the burning that Councillor Fain just mentioned, impacts of agriculture as well. And we did find that there wasn't a huge difference between the responses or the proportion of responses from each district. So I'm fairly confident that the results are representative across the board. I think, yeah, I don't think there was a huge difference on the questions that we analysed between the two areas. Sorry.
Yes, Councillor Orange.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the key priority 2, the infrastructure improvements. In every month in the parish council meetings I go to, I am asked about public transport, as I think many people are, and I just wonder what your view is around the influence we can have around public transport options and where in the priority pecking order that might be.
Thank you, Councillor Oren Green. That's a really interesting question. Air quality has always been a slightly difficult subject because the responsibility for monitoring and things like writing a strategy fall with the district councils or the borough councils, whereas most of the solutions sit with the county or the highway authority. So there's always been a little bit of a conflict there. So yes, so that's always been a sort of inbuilt difficulty into the air quality structure. We are having quarterly meetings with all stakeholders. So hopefully we will be able to keep this as a high priority. So we will be having quarterly updates. We've already had a couple in the preparation of this strategy, and we will be continuing to have those as we move forward. And they involve all of the key stakeholders, such as the GCP, there's so many, isn't there? the county, the Peterborough and Cambridge Combined Authority, Highways England, and obviously district and city. So all the stakeholders do get together every quarter. We have a big discussion. So there are definitely mechanisms there to keep the pressure and the influence up.
Thank you very much. That'll be very useful feedback for my council. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And maybe it would just be good to have a sort of an update from those meetings. If things come out of those meetings, that would be good as well in terms of communication back out to part of the monitoring. Yes, Councillor Jeff Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. On page 29, which is the section covering responses, question 11, what actions would you like to take and what are the barriers that prevent you from currently undertaking these actions? One of the bullet points there is to buy an air source heat pump and or solar panels. Referring to air source heat pumps, response number 4, difficulties with listed properties or difficult because living in a rented property. Taking the first of those two, I've personally seen the problems that one of my residents had installing a heat pump, and the amount of go-arounds with the conservation officer around what type of trellis should be put around the heat pump, the design of the trellis that should be put around the heat pump, all of this introduced so many delays that the heat pump delivery had to be rescheduled. The end of last year, Historic England published new guidance aimed at local authorities, aimed to clarify their position on the balance between improving the energy efficiency of historic buildings and preserving the historic fabric. And there was quite a long paper specifically on the issue of air source heat pumps, which really the stated aim of which was to dispel some of the myths around heat pumps. I know this is one of the threads that is in our forward plan, either to look again at a balance between improving energy efficiency and preserving the historic fabric. And I hope we can sort of add that to the list of things that we were discussing in that session. And I think I've just sort of looked up, I think it's the case that, for example, if I wanted to put an oil boiler in my house, I could put an oil tank there and that would be a permitted development, but oil tanks are quite a bit larger than air source heat pumps. So I just wanted to sort of flag that, really. I think that's a very valid piece of feedback from our residents.
Noted. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, noted. I think sort of detailed responses beyond this strategy. But thank you for highlighting. Thank you.
Councillor Dr. Tumi Hawkins.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make a point on the issue of the air pump installation that's been made. The Greater Cambridgeshire Planning Service, actually, we do have a web page on the website that talks about how listed buildings can be made more energy efficient, and it's something that we continually work on to improve the advice and the assistance that the planning service can give. Obviously, there's issues with listed buildings, what you can or cannot do, etc. But it's, I believe, also in the policies we're looking at for emerging local plan anyway. So yes, we're doing the best we can for now, and we'll carry on doing that. But if there's negative feedback that anyone is getting, then do please raise that directly with me or with the conservation or the director of planning, and we hope to improve on what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Tumi. As Councillor Jeff Harvey said, we do have in the forward plan something that came out of the motion that was adopted by full council, which was to enable that to improve, was to collate a series of case studies of different ways in which planning applications had been dealt, to look at positive and other examples, rather than just to be reactive. I think we've come to the point now where we've got enough evidence to then say, so what could be the next step forward? So I think that's what we're saying with the forward plan. It will come to committee in that way to sort of workshop it together with planning. So that would be a good thing. Thank you very much. Do you have anybody else with comments on the air quality strategy? Councillor Dr. Shabanish. Oh, sorry. No, because people online won't be able to hear you. So Councillor Dr. Shabana Bhattacharya is just going to have help. I think just for those who are, they won't be able to hear you if they're online, I think. Yeah.
I have a question on the page number 27. Okay, yeah. So you have a very nice way of, nice graph, and that shows that we can do lots of public education, actually. The public is the main people, they can change their behavior and everything. So my question is that how are we reaching out to the public? We are trying to reach out in different ways, and how we are reaching out every time with the new updates, like in the research and everything, like the before and after. So this before condition, before statistics and after statistics, it really brings the trust and the faith that whatever they are doing, that is correct method. And any measurable outputs will bring even more trust that, yeah, whatever they're doing, that's a correct way. So how do you do that? Like, is it a continuous process, reaching out to the public through the updates, what is happening, what was there before, what is coming, what is the result coming after some changes in their lifestyle? So is there any procedure like that?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Really interesting question. I do think this is one of the areas where we do need to improve slightly. South Cambridgeshire is, we actually do fantastic monitoring here, but we don't shout about it enough. So I think presenting our results of our monitoring in a easily digestible way, making sure that the public is kept up to date with everything we're doing, simple bits of advice on a regular basis through our social media and other South Cambs magazine and things like that is definitely what we need to do. So we did have an article in the South Cambs magazine just before Christmas on solid fuel burning and how to minimise your impact. So it is about drip feeding the message and making sure that residents hear about it regularly, but it's also about getting that messaging right. And I've seen some other examples of local authorities where they don't get the messaging right, and it almost has a negative impact if you're perhaps too harsh on your messaging or overstate the impacts. So it is a really difficult thing to get the balance right. But yeah, it is something we know we need to keep doing, keep improving on. Yeah, definitely happy to engage with any councillors who want to do any work in their particular areas. We do have the portable Zephyr monitors that we have around at various locations. If there's anywhere that a councillor feels that would be a particularly interesting study, then please let us know, either directly to me or our generic air.quality email.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. Like your first point is very interesting. That is the behavior change or the eating behavior. Is there any way that we can also go for not the public consultation, but the consultation among the business holders? And if we can see their statistics of the business, how they are going in the curve, like how the business is going, like in terms of the purchasing. And then we can really we can correlate what we are trying to establish, the public behavior of a responsible eating. Is it working or not? Can we bring some work methodology working directly with the business and those who are involved in the food business? Especially the meat, because your first point is eat less meat. So I'm asking, is it any way that we can do that, going to the meat industry, the business, and looking into their statistics, how the business works? Is there any change of the behavior? It's a difficult question, but I'm thinking that when we do some research and statistics, we can really establish that what we are trying to do from the behind, in the background, in a closed room thinking procedure, is it actually working in the field?
Yeah, thank you. Some really interesting points there. So yeah, I think that was, I think eating less meat was one of the respondents' suggestions to what they could do to reduce their impact. But yeah, there's potentially lots of research out there we could do. Happy to discuss outside this meeting some more detailed ideas. Happy to discuss, yeah.
Councillor Warren Green.
Just a question about monitoring and the reporting. And I think at the last committee I asked about benchmarking across other places in the country. And I'm just wondering whether or not that is something that will be implemented in this, because I didn't see it. And I feel like in the media at the moment, there's a lot of coverage at the moment about air quality in different places, different cities. I feel like Cambridge and Cambridgeshire, some of us want to attract more people to come to with the booming economy that's coming, and air quality does come into decision making. And I'm just wondering if we are benchmarking, and if we are, whether or not we'll be able to get data on that to use out in our communities as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's not something we're doing at this moment, but as I said in response to an earlier question, getting out really good, easily digestible information to the public is something we need to improve on, and I'll be looking to work on over the following months. And yes, benchmarking against similar sized cities or similar sort of the nearest neighbours in terms of sort of urban rural makeup and things Yes, so we can look at how we would respond to that. I would say the east of England does have a higher level of particulates because we're more impacted from sort of intercontinental particulates. So if you start comparing us to places in the northwest, we might look worse, but that's not necessarily any of our own making, but it's just we're more impacted by intercontinental particulate matter. So yeah, we can look at benchmarking, but yeah, obviously just with caution, I would say.
Yes, Councillor please wrap.
Thank you, Chair. For the data on particulate matter, it's got non-industrial combustion plants as the main source. I guess that means the sources that we can control, perhaps. I just wondered if we had any idea of the makeup of that at all, if it is mostly wood-burning stoves or if it is bonfires. I was hoping not barbecues, personally, but that was just my own thought on that. And just if we were using that kind of information to help prioritise our action plan. And then also, this is just me not knowing whether there's any kind of regulation over whether you can have wood-burning stoves or anything like that, because we've been hearing about all the regulation for air source heat pumps as a heat source, but I just wondered if there was anything on that as well. Thank you.
So thank you, Councillor Redrup. That's yeah, a couple of interesting questions. So firstly, yes, it's the non-industrial. It's made up of all of those things that you mentioned, basically, and it varies from place to place. We get that data from DEFRA, and I don't think it's granulated enough to say which of those particular sources is the worst. I think generally it's considered that yeah, it is domestic solid fuel burning. It is one of the worst, but yeah, obviously outside bonfires will have an impact. Yeah, unfortunately, barbecues, we can't avoid it, but barbecues will have an impact. Obviously, we need to take a balanced view on these things, and yeah. So yes, it will be made up of all of those things. And the second question rules around wood burning stoves. So so certain areas have smoke control areas. We don't have any in South Cambridgeshire. And there are restrictions to what you can burn and to what you can install in smoke control areas. But yeah, obviously, if you don't have any, you can't enforce them. And we don't have any in South Cambs. They do have one in Cambridge, but this is sort of legislation which was brought in, I think, in the 60s, and a lot of the existing smoke control areas are sort of outdated and don't necessarily reflect the communities that are present today. There are also regulations on the sale of solid fuels, and that should be enforced by trading standards. I'm not sure how rigorously that's enforced in South Cambridgeshire or in Cambridgeshire in general. But yes, there are regulations around what people can sell in terms of the moisture content of the wood and the types of coal that can be sold. So, and in what volumes they can be sold and things like that. But yeah, I think we need to, we perhaps need to do a bit of work on how well that's being enforced.
Councillor Dr. Bhattacharya.
Thank you. There is a new national air quality 2023 on the page number 33. So my question, like, where are we standing now? Can council help me to know that where are we standing in terms of the national statistics, like far better or average or below average? Like, are we good?
So in South Cambs, yeah, there's different pollutants. So in terms of nitrogen dioxide, where we have fairly good air quality. So nitrogen dioxide is principally associated with exhausts, vehicle exhausts, particularly diesels, and so generally we're one of the lowest levels of pollution in terms of that. So in terms of that, we are very good. Particulate matter, we are not quite as good, partly because of the, as I mentioned in answer to earlier question about the intercontinental particulate matter that impacts the east of England more than it does the north and the west. So yeah, it's different for different pollutants, but generally, we are reasonably good air quality, but as mentioned in the report, you know, there's no safe level, and so any reductions are sort of welcome.
So can I come in with my question just before Dr. Tumi Hawkins? Or you were going to have yours first?
Can I just, something that has been at the back of my mind is the fact that this is an issue that we didn't have before, and it's the fact that this part of South Cambs now lies under a new airspace deployment scheme, the AD6, for flights to Luton. And what we found is that planes coming across are having to use their air brakes to get down to the level that they can then go into Luton, and some have actually reported smelling plane fuel. Now, we'd hope that the test would have proven that this was not the right thing to do. It did go quiet until about 2-3 weeks ago, and now we're hearing the planes again. So this is going to be a big issue for us. And I just wondered if any of this, I didn't see anything in it in the report, so I'm just bringing that up now. That's something that we really need to look at very seriously.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Yeah, that wasn't an issue I was aware of, so thank you for bringing it to my attention. If you want to speak to me afterwards and give me some of the more details, I'll be happy to look into it. Thank you.
Thanks. I think it is of such grave concern. It would be good actually for something to come back to the committee with, because if it's DEFRA bringing, what we're getting is DEFRA sort of non-differentiated information. But if indeed this stacking that's happening of the flights coming from Luton is causing even more greater ambient particulate matter, then I think, you know, as background, that's really important. So that would be good to know if that's something for us to consider. And it's something that I would kind of like to bring back with Dr. Bhattacharya's question there, I think. So the objectives we're saying here are to maintain and improve air quality, because we know that any air pollution actually isn't safe. And reading the Chief Medical Officer's report on air pollution and air quality from December 2022, which gives us indications of the types of disease and mortality from you know, in the womb to elderly, frail and vulnerable people, it is very worrying. So we have got a situation in South Cambs where it's been seen as pretty good, but we've always wanted to be aware of any changes because we are one of the fastest growing places in the country. So it is our duty to make sure that we understand what is happening and put the regulatory aspects into place, particularly around development and planning, to make sure that it is. And as I understand, South Cambs is one of the few places in the country that, whilst others are managing to decarbonise because of decarbonisation of transport, but actually our emissions for transport are going up because of the growth and the increased traffic. So what we have, and you know, your mention of the intercontinental particulates, if I understand correctly, it's about the level of exposure cumulatively over the day, which is the most damaging thing. So it's not just where have you got sort of some bad air quality, it's what is your day like from when you leave home or you're at home, you're going to school, dropping the kids or perhaps going to work, the children in the school, and all of those particulates where we've got a baseline where we've already got intercontinental particulates that come to the east of England that are hanging around. So if we then add to that from our new development, from new transport, from things that we're not controlling, we've actually got a more vulnerable situation. So it can see that we're quite good with it, with our pollution, but actually we've got less bandwidth for things to get worse because we've already got. So rather than comparing us, you know, I think Dr. Warren, with Councillor Warren Green, rather than kind of the benchmarking, it's more, given that we've got this amount already in the atmosphere, how much are we adding to that? And therefore, what is that leading to in terms of exposure of our residents to that? So for me, it's far less about saying, we haven't got a problem because our air quality is fine. No, it's at no level is good of air pollution, and we've got this amount of air particulates hanging around anyway for a long time. Therefore, we have to make sure that we're as cautious as possible, given our growth. With that, I think what I'd like to celebrate is the fact that this is a joint air quality strategy. So when we started the committee, after we were elected in 2018, the Climate Change and Environment Advisory Committee, at that point, there was the two air quality strategies between Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire became separate. And yet we know these are inextricably linked. So the fact that you've managed to bring these together, gone out to consultation, and we now have a Greater Cambridge air quality strategy, I think is really good. To the point of around the education, and I noticed that sort of the anti-idling, so the anti-idling of cars, particularly outside school gates, the 20-mile-per-hour zones. I've seen wonderful campaigns by children and transport ambassadors, for example, in Melbourne and Meldreth, I've seen those happening. I think where we can actually, as part of the Zero Carbon Communities education and the Green Connect, is making sure that there's more and more information about that. Because I don't know any parent that would want to see idling, knowing the impacts of that right outside the school. So I think things like that, and also the fact that, was it less than 50% knew that you can actually look at daily air quality on the website? And I think that we've got to let people know it's in their own hands. They can go to that, they can see it for themselves. So there's obviously, like you were saying, even though it was said that it was least important, didn't mean it's not important, it was least important out of a multiple choice of priorities, it was least important, the issue around communication. I do think it's our responsibility to make sure people know that what's happening in terms of positive campaigns, but also that they can have at their fingertips the level of air quality in different areas. Thank you. So, Dr. Warren, Matthew Warren Green.
I just want to mention, I wasn't suggesting that in benchmarking we would say we're all fine, everything's fine. I was suggesting that we should benchmark so we can get lessons learned as well from other places, and to give people confidence that we are addressing the areas where we have issues, as well as celebrating those areas where we don't. So it's a mix of both. I think people tend to focus on the things that aren't going well. So I think, but we do need to be aware of those. And then I know that within the communities that I'm representing, they really want to help, they really want to make a difference. So if they know where the trigger points are, where the issues are, they can help to bring that down. But there are lessons to be learned from elsewhere, I think.
Sorry if I've misinterpreted what you were saying, but absolutely, yeah, that's completely right. Members, any other questions or comments? Sorry, Dr. Petro.
Page number 38, if you see the table, my question is that are we adding more pollutant what WHO expect us to do? Why WHO is so less? And you don't have to answer if it is not related to the council. But I'm very surprised to see this table. Why WHO allowed pollutants are so less, and why in UK we are so high? So are we adding more pollutant what WHO expect us not to do, or but we are also part of the country or the nation? Like how it is so so different in number?
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Bhattacharya. We couldn't agree with you more, and this is what we said at the committee meeting in December, is that there was lots of criticism of the Environment Act when it didn't come in with similar targets or even interim targets which were equivalent to the WHO, because we know that no level is safe. So what we're doing in this air quality strategy is going beyond the national. We're saying we're going to try and be better than that, because of everything that you've said, that we should absolutely be on that pathway to being as good as we can be. So on that note, members, and thank you to officers for all that work, would we like to recommend, therefore, that the air quality strategy be approved by Cabinet? By affirmation? Agreed. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Good. We go to agenda item 7, which is the social housing stock decarbonisation update. And as you know, this is something that is very dear to our hearts and we've been pursuing regularly. So it's very, very good to see a lot of the information in this update. And also, yes, if you'd like to give us a briefing on that.
Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, I'll make it as brief as possible to allow for some questions and so on. We, as a South Coast, we have been quite ahead of the curve in relation to decarbonisation in the housing stock over the last sort of 10, 15 years. We've been quite proactive in insulation and solar panels and those kind of things. So we had a bit of a head start before we got involved. So the government's targets have changed yet again. The timescales have extended for the target to reach EPC C. So we've now moved from 2025, 27 up to 28 and 30. There is probably potential that will change again, purely based on the resources that are available to deliver. So we'll see how that goes. Where we are currently, we're in a reasonably good place. We've just completed a full stock condition survey on all of our properties, and what that's returned is that we've had a slight drop on our overall average by about 1.5 EPC points, which has just dropped us down from an average C into an average D. But they're easily recoverable because they're simple measures that will sort of get us back from the extra 2 points that we need. We've had a bit of a sort of restructure in the property services side of things, which has given us a vacancy where we previously had a gas engineer that was sort of doing a lot of the gas heating and so on. And with obviously the phasing out of gas and so on, we're changing that post slightly to be a dedicated heating surveyor with good specialisms in sort of sustainability and decarbonisation, so that will help us a lot further on the heating of properties, which is good. And we're starting to sort of steer away from any storage heater type of heating, because that's at the moment they return reasonably well on EPCs, but with the new standards that are due to come in, they will be a poorer performer. So there's a lot of things to consider as the sort of rules, regulations, and the technology advances as we go through. Really, as a sort of an overview, we don't really want to be just aiming for numbers, whereas we've got the target to reach the EPC sort of C on all their properties. We're very much focused on the affordability and the comfort of the property itself, rather than fitting sort of supplementary items like solar panels and that kind of stuff, which will have an effect on the EPC values. The actual running of the property itself, with the extra insulation and so on, it won't be as beneficial to the property, but it will be beneficial to the EPC rating. So there's a lot of things to consider within that. So we're working on that at the moment. We've got a partly funded project at the moment aimed at around about the 250 properties, where we are concentrating on fabric first. Some properties we have are very complex or very difficult to retrofit to, so they are being looked at in more detail. But the current funded project is for about £4 million over 2 years, and we're just about to start on some of the installation works on those. So that'll be good for that project, and based on the information from the stock condition survey that we've had back, we've got a much better basis to plan for the rest of the stock for future planning and so on. Within the report, there's some examples of different scenario plans that we've got on there, and rough costings of what it's going to cost to achieve that, and what percentage of our stock we could actually get to a band B or a band A or so on. And to try and achieve a band A, we wouldn't even make 60% of our stock, because the type of property is just not the right type of property to be able to install enough measures to bring that up to that level. So once we've got all the rest of it in a number of years' time, we'll have a selection of properties which are either impractical or impossible to increase to a better level than we would imagine. So yeah, over the coming months, now we've got the rest of the data in, we will be sort of putting together a sort of a plan which will take us up to the current deadline of 2028, so that we know roughly where we are, and that will have some costings associated with that, so we know what funding we need to provide. And obviously from there on, it will be for the overall sort of 2050 as best as we can. Attached within the report is the two appendices. One is the example of the retrofit assessment, which is part of the past 2035 requirements for the government funding, which most retrofit is now sort of required to have, which gives quite a lot of detail insofar as what the property is like now, what we can possibly achieve, the emissions of the property and so on. So once we get all those in, we can collate sort of a project report on what we're saving on the actual carbon footprint, as well as where we achieve on the EPC ratings. And for anybody that likes a bit of soft bedtime reading, is the SHDF report submissions, which we have to do on a monthly basis back to DENS for the funding part of the project. So that's probably an overview. So if I open up, anyone's got any questions in relation to that, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Eddie. Yes, any questions from the committee on the report? Councillor Dr. Toomey Hawkins.
Thank you, Eddie, for your update. I think two things for me. EPC ratings. I presume those are being done initially by the normal assessors rather than MERS, who I think I read are doing the retrofit work. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. MERS are main contractor for that. But obviously from there are subcontractors which go out, and we've been using consultants called C6, which are specialist retrofit assessors that are doing the retrofit assessments and designs and so on.
Okay, so I'm just trying to understand whether the EPCs are a basis for carrying out the retrofit work. Are you using that as a baseline?
That's where a baseline has come from,
Yeah.
which is our current EPC ratings. Historically, the EPC data that we've got could be up to 10 years old, which is why we're having the past 2035 retrofit assessments. Although it's a requirement of the funding, it's also a far more in-depth version of the EPC, which is where the details of the report come from. So we get a much more detailed view.
Okay. No, thank you for that. It's just, as somebody who deals with EPCs on a regular basis, I must admit I have seen some reports that did not take into account all the features in the property and gave a lower rating than they should have done. So it's making sure that those reports are done properly.
Yeah. On the standards, on the standard EPC, there are some where assumptions are made on things like things that aren't visible without being intrusive.
Exactly.
But with these, if there's any question on things, they have done intrusive sort of boroscope inspections and that kind of stuff to ensure that things like cavity wall insulation is in place and that kind of stuff.
Okay. And secondly, it's on the quality of the retrofit being done. Now, yes, mayors, we know mayors, do good work, but there are times when the work doesn't come out as good quality as it should. And I have recently come across information that might suggest that mayors might not be doing as well as they say they are. How do we, what's what I'm looking for? Is there a quality survey or something that we do for the work to make sure that what they say they've done is actually good enough?
I'm fully aware of what you're referring to with that. Within our MEA's contract, the delivery of the SHDF work is being done from MEA's central department, which is they're doing about 11 or 12, I think, local authorities and housing associations across the country on the same SHDF project. So it's being sort of managed centrally from MEA's. The delivery of the installation work is being run from our local branch, and there will be regular inspections and so on the delivery of that within place. And in regard to the other comments that have sort of recently cropped up about the quality of information and so on, we are, as we always do sort of diligence checks, but we're increasing the level of diligence checks that we're actually doing on any returned data that we get from them. But like I say, we're also hoping to have a retrofit officer in place that will actually manage this completely on the delivery side. So we'll see how it turns out. But I can assure you that it won't be the double glazing of many years ago situation. So it's we'll make sure that what we get is a good quality.
Councillor Peter Vane, did you speak?
Thank you. Yes, just following up that briefly, another question, if I may. I think it is important that C6, in undertaking the baseline work, are seen to be independent of MEAs in following up with the installation rather than subcontractors. I don't know if that's the case. My question was really in relation to, we're coming to a point where gas as a source of heating will be, for new heating systems, will be phased out. I'm not quite sure now the exact date because that's changed. But there are schemes that are showing benefits of heat networks, particularly inclusion of ground source rather than air source heat pumps. I'm thinking, of course, of schemes like Swaff and Prior, where the results are now starting to come through. And I think that councils have a particular opportunity to demonstrate those, because we have a number of properties in the same area, whereas builders of new properties are reluctant to include ground source because that's not what their people are demanding. They want individual systems. And I'm wondering whether, as part of this strategy, we are looking at heat source and at heat networks, at heat pumps and heat networks.
Eddie, just before that, can I also add into this mix? I think Councillor Brian Milnes had put a question in. He's online. He's put it into the chat as well. It's just whether, given the heat pumps that have been installed already, is there any data already collated in terms of the impacts on residents' bills so far? If you can line that in with Councillor Peter Fane's question there.
Yeah, I'll touch on the bill situation first, because that's probably the easiest one to deal with. Because of the increased unit costs, people aren't necessarily seeing huge benefits on their costs, because I mean, we've had huge increases over the last few years on electricity unit costs, and I think we're probably 4 or 5 times where we were 4 years ago. So what would normally show as a benefit in reduction in costs are only really showing a benefit in reduction in number of units used. So it's hard for the residents to sort of see that decrease, because the unit cost increase have covered off what they would have saved anyway. It's only once you sort of sit down and work out what their bills would have been if they hadn't moved across that you would actually see the benefits to that. We have, on a couple of properties, done sort of a bit more of a detailed breakdown of it. We haven't shared it. Maybe we should have shared some more data on that, but we can look to including that in the next report if that's something that people would wish for.
Yeah, I think that'll be very useful.
Okay, no problem. Okay, then in regard to the heat network situation, there is a project sort of bubbling away, very, very early stages at the moment. We are also looking ourselves at doing one on a smaller scale, on a block of flats that we've got. We've got a good number of flats, and we've got a decent amount of land that surround the flats where we could introduce a ground source of some description. But that is very much at idea stage before we go into sort of any kind of feasibility or so on. We have had a basic feasibility on it to give us an idea, but we've got to sort of follow that forward, because the infrastructure side of it is incredibly expensive. It does get slightly more problematic when you've got leaseholders and so on in flats, and how we sort of bring those on board, and whether the freedom of choice or that kind of thing. In regard to sort of a wider look at the sort of projects, it is slightly difficult because of the makeup of the stock and the leaseholders, private owners, and so on, and the land that's available to actually install the infrastructure of these things. And on a lot of places where we have got a sort of a density of properties, we don't necessarily have available land to put the infrastructure in. So there's various things, but I'm sure as we sort of progress further and these technologies become more widely understood, it's something that maybe that we sort of start to look at in a bigger way. But at the moment, it's very difficult, bearing in mind the costs involved.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Peter Sanford.
Thank you, Chair. With respect to heat networks, one of the Caxton Parish councillors went off on his own and did a feasibility study. He came back reporting the costs were probably 10 times what an individual village could stand. So maybe we need to think about more coordination at a district level, perhaps joining up schemes, perhaps finding grants for these guys. They're very keen to get started, but the cost was a blocker.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, totally agree.
Sorry, Eddie, go on.
No, just say totally agree. It's the infrastructure costs that are the sort of crippling factor, really.
Councillor Jeff Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. It's fashionable to take a contrarian view to all our efforts to reduce carbon emissions in some quarters, and I had a discussion on a doorstep, somebody who really claimed to have, professional knowledge in these matters, saying, of course, retrofitting, external retrofitting doesn't work because you get build up of moisture, and talking about membranes and this and that. And I must say I'm really skeptical on that, but I just wondered, is this now at a stage where it could be regarded as a mature technology, and if there were teething issues at the start, we now understand how to avoid those problems, and I'm thinking about sort of damp and mold and all those things. Is it now the case that we understand what we need to do so well that actually really all we need is more resource and more people trained to really accelerate this process?
Yeah, we've definitely learned a lot of lessons over the years. If we go back to the sort of early days when sort of the external wall insulation, for example, become the way forward on a lot of the solid wall properties. We were putting those in sort of 10 plus years ago. And the biggest problem that was identified over time with that is that you were making the property sort of so airtight, and you was having the problems of damp and mold and so on forming in the properties because of lack of airflow. So within what the designs and so on that are put in place now for insulation and cavity wall and all sorts of works that we do is to make sure that the whole property is reviewed properly, that there is suitable ventilation and airflow through the properties, that kind of thing. It's the same with most things that become sort of a new technology that become more mainstream. The more we do, the more we learn. And as a sector and an industry, we have learned a lot over the last sort of number of years. Even with the air source heat pumps, there's been a number of sort of design changes with those to make them more effective and make them work better. Whereas the perception that a lot of people had is that they weren't very good, didn't work very well. But then it's down to the older type of design was letting them down. The more modern ones that we're looking at now are much more efficient. They do much better heating. They're a higher temperature base. So it's the same with all technologies. We learn all the time, and I'm sure that the more we do, the more we'll learn. And I don't think the learning circle of that is ever going to stop, to be fair. So, but what we've learned from historic installs, yes, we have learned a lot about what we need to do to change.
Thank you. Councillor Dr. Bhattacharya, and then afterwards.
Your page number 33, or this is 33, or page number 92. There is a flood risk, and I'm actually mentioning about area in the corner of the A428 and Caxton, where there is a kebab shop. The whole area is actually flooded. Is it any way to be discussed in this meeting?
Eddie?
There are various areas in the district that are liable to flooding, and that's generally because of the increased rainfall and whatever that we have had. so far this year, we've had a incredibly high level. There are a couple of areas where it seems to be a continued problem, but that's more for the waterways that are looking into that rather than a housing issue. I know there are a couple that they are sort of concentrating on at the moment, where there has been a bit of backing up and a bit of flow issues with flooding. So, but as far as the sort of the housing side of things, where we're discharging into the drainage and the local system, they're doing what they should be doing. It's the wider drainage system which has issues really.
Thank you.
Yeah, just follow-up question. It looks like the house problem and the drainage system, not like the rain water are stagnant over there, but it's a completely flooded in the park, in the parking zone. I have taken couple of photos, which I can post it. But then, if council can have a look into it, it looks like an housing.
Yeah, if you want to email me those directly, I'll speak to you about those outside this meeting. We'll look at the specifics on that.
Yeah, Councillor Peter Fane.
Well, just a brief follow-up to earlier on. I entirely accept what Eddie Spicer says about the difficulties of heat networks and the potential costs. But I think some of the research that's been going on elsewhere, and indeed the Swaffham Prior project that I mentioned, is suggesting that there may be some useful ways of tackling those that are more available to councils, where there may be, for instance, large council houses, and there may be neighbouring properties. Of course, there are intervening properties that would have been sold off, so that makes it more complicated. But I think it's something that it would be very interesting, if I may suggest, to come back to this committee at some future date to report, because I understand you're looking at this as a possible project. It may be a year or two, I don't know. And there is some very interesting work which has been funded by the government under the Green Transition Scheme, one looking at specifically of energy efficiency retrofitting to existing houses that I thought might be relevant to us and perhaps would be worth looking into.
Thank you. And Councillor Dr. Lisa Redrup.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if it's possible to give any information about the solar PV self-installed trials that are mentioned, where it says 10 properties are being involved in a viability trial. Thank you.
Yes, there is. With the solar panels that we've got on our properties at the moment, we've got over 2,000, I think, in various places. The initial project that was done in bulk was an investment rent-a-roof system, where investment companies were taking advantage of the high level of feed-in tariffs at the time. Since then, obviously, the feed-in tariffs are so low, or the smart generation returns that we get now are so low that there's no financial incentive or benefit to actually installing the solar panels for us as a council. However, the benefits to the residents are quite large, because they get the savings on the generation that they've got. There would probably be a greater saving to the resident if we was to look at battery storage as well, which we're at this moment where we've been advised to sort of stay away from the battery storage just at the minute for various reasons. So with the ones where we're saying that we're self-delivering, is we've got some properties which are part of the SHDF funding project, which may end up with some solar PV on as a supplementary measure to sort of finish off the decarbonisation of the particular property. And there are also some trials that we're doing on different archetypes in different parts of the district, with a new contractor that we've got that's given us very favourable sort of rates on the install. So in that respect, it's purely for the benefit of the residents as opposed to the benefit to us, other than showing a benefit on the decarbonisation side and an increase in the EPC. So if that's successful and the contractor that we've got doing these works out to be okay and the quality is good, then that's something that we'll be integrating potentially sort of in a bit more longer term as part of the wider picture for decarbonisation of the stock.
Thank you. Can I just ask what the self-installed bit means? Sorry, I didn't quite follow that.
Oh, sorry, in regards to that, that's self-installed as in we're installing them, as opposed to the majority that we've got, which are sort of rent-a-roof. So we aren't actually responsible for the solar panels. They're an investment company elsewhere that manage those. We just rent the roof to them, if that makes sort of a bit more sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Councillor Warren Green.
Eddie, first of all, I just want to say I thought this report was really thorough, and I really like the data within it, and I like the fact that you've got time frames and can very, very clearly see what you're working on and the quantity and the sort of span of your work. I'm also interested to hear what you've been saying about the benefits to residents, and I'm interested to know how residents are responding. Are they feeling the benefits? Are you getting positive responses? How's it going out there for you?
We seem to have sort of two levels of response, if you like. You've got the very visible ones, people that have had solar panels and that kind of stuff. It can be seen. It's very much there, and it's yes, it's great, and so on. We've had other feedback from ones more with the fabric first side of things, where we're looking more towards the fabric of the building, the insulation, and making the building itself more insulated, cheaper to run, etc. We've had sort of some feedback that the property feels better, but again, with the way that the unit costs of either electric or gas or oil or whatever for their heating, financially they don't necessarily see the benefit, but that will, as sort of time progresses and the fuel costs hopefully stabilise, then there will be sort of much better benefits shown financially for them. But from my point of view, doing the property and insulating the property gives us the best longevity for that property for ongoing benefits, whereas with a solar panel, for example, is a supplementary addition. It does make a small difference, but it's from a sort of sustainable long-term perspective. They do have a lifespan, and at some point they will start to degenerate and start sort of generating far less than they do when they're brand new. So it's a bit of both, but we are getting some good feedback. We're also getting some poor comments that people, they haven't noticed the difference or whatever, or we need to revisit the property and look at additional measures, for example, because some of our properties are very, very difficult to retrofit, and we could put in thousands of pounds worth of insulation, but if it's got drafts coming up through the floor, you're never going to make it the best it can be. Then we've got to revisit and look at insulated floors and things like that. So it's a bit of a minefield, but the majority is good feedback.
Thank you. I think
And
that's useful, and I think that it's good that you're getting the feedback and you're clearly engaging with people as you're doing it, and that's great to hear. Thank you.
Thanks. And so, Eddie, can I just, in terms of understanding what you've given as well here in the report, which is, you're saying using that planning tool, it's really brilliant to see here, that planning tool that's therefore saying, what are the estimations for all of the stock that we have for different levels of retrofit, yeah? And so what you've got there, which is when you say about what's required to get 99.5% of properties to EPC band C as a minimum. That's that final row there. As I'm understanding from the report, that is what we've chosen to do as a council, that's the 2.7 million that's in the report. What I'm not sure about, because if you look at the equivalent sort of other types of getting up to band B or band A, you know, it's just astronomical, the difference in cost, therefore, of doing that type of retrofit. What I wasn't sure about was within the report and when you presented it is whether or not there's a feeling of pressure that we need to go beyond band C. And I'm remembering that in the Local Government Association, LGA, when we had board discussions around this and a lot of the reports came in, it was that actually band C is good and it is good enough. And both for emissions and for keeping people warm and keeping their bills down. So I'm just wondering, is there a debate still at the moment within the council about whether or not we should be looking for our own housing stock to be going beyond that band C? And then also my second question then is that 2.7 million, the report seems to say, and one of the reasons we were so keen to see this was, what is the cost of getting all of our properties, that 99.5%, to a point where we're reducing the emissions, we're getting people's bills down and we're keeping them warm in our properties. How much will that cost us in terms of what needs to be done and where will we find that money? So at the moment, as I'm understanding, the report is saying all of that would have to be funded by grants. If there are properties, just like you said, which are so difficult, so one, is that right? Are we only looking at grants and therefore if we don't get the grants, and brilliant that you've got the 4 million of grants, you know, that's really good and hard work by officers to get that 4 million over 2 years. We need another 2.7. That's officer time to get that additional grants. If there are properties that actually it doesn't make sense, are we looking also at rebuilding, at replacing those properties because of that? So there's kind of 2.5 questions there.
Okay, I'll start on the easy one, which is quite complicated, but it's probably the easiest one to answer. On those figures that we've got there, like I said previously, with different types of measures, and solar panels are a great way to improve your EPC rating. On that one of 2.7 million, that is kind of our cheapest option to get to band C. Within that will include a substantial amount of solar panels and other type of supplementary areas. The best way to achieve it is obviously, like I said, through Fabric First, and Fabric First is by far the more expensive retrofit options, but they are the better options sort of longer term. So the figures that are shown there are quite they're more for an indicative type of guide to show you what kind of what costs different type of options would be. I mean, if you look at the first one, the SAT B, to bring 89% of properties up to SAT B, which is where the FF is the Fabric First approach, you're looking at best part of 60 million. Unfortunately, I haven't included on there the band C Fabric First, which was somewhere around about 19 million. So there is a huge difference between quick fix supplementary stuff to raise EPC ratings against retrofitting the things that are actually going to be a good long-term benefit. So there's sort of a number of options to explore. If we were given a very short deadline and said, right, you've got to do this by next week, then it would be sort of the biggest bang for your buck, if you like. But for the benefit of the residents and the properties themselves, it's the Fabric First option, which is the way forward.
So can I ask on that one? So Eddie, that would have been really good to include. I understand now that FF on them. So, but actually, so our ideal situation with given sort of, you know, how much resources are available really, but it would be around, sorry about that. I had turned all this, would be we're looking at not 2.7 million, but you're looking at 19 million.
Yeah, if we was to take the fabric first approach. However, obviously the costs and prices and so on, they're constantly varying, and the different ways of doing things are obviously always changing, and the technology is changing as we go forward. As far as the sort of funding that we've got so far, our current project that we've got over the current 2 years is a co-funded. We got grant funding of 1.7 million, and we are funding the balance, which is brings it almost 50-50. So sort of going forward from a financial point of view, now we've got the real data, and we're going to work on that plan over the next couple of months to actually say this is definitely the way we want to go forward. That will give us the best idea on exact costings, and then we can sort of look at what funding is available to us. The SHDF funding, which we're currently involved with, there was an additional phase which was released at the end of last year. But because we were so deep into this one, we're just, from a resource perspective, it wouldn't make sense for us to then take on a second round of funding in the middle of this one while we're still collating the data and everything from stock condition surveys and making a plan. Once we've got the plan in place, then we can try and sort of gain as much funding as we possibly can for whatever's available, and then try and do that in the sort of at some speed. But again, we're trying to do things at speed with the current situation is the lack of resource and sort of skilled staff in the marketplace. And that is the biggest hindrance to the whole thing at the moment, because it's obviously there's a lot of funding around, a number of billions of pounds that the government's put into this over the last sort of couple of years. And the whole country's getting involved. So there's a lot of money there that's available to be spent, but the resource to actually deliver that at this moment in time doesn't exist. So there's a lot of training going on and so on to get the skilled staff in place to be able to deliver this.
Thanks so much, Lee. So in a way, what we'd be looking at is kind of the next update, which is when we've got the more detailed information, and that would be, because what we're not seeing here, though it's great to see that 2.7 million would be sort of the quick fix approach. What we're looking at is that balance between the emissions reduction and what's better longer term for residents in terms of getting keeping them warm and their bills down. So it would be between 2.7 and 19 million in a way, I suppose. You'd be then looking at some decisions being made as to what's available with the existing future grants, and what the council may put forward as well, or may be able to through its own budget. Yes, yeah. And noting as well the additional pressure on staffing and officers. I think we should note that as well, how that's a key issue for you to be able to continue with this work. Yeah, and that was, from what I understand, it was a key driver to the government extending the deadlines from 25, 27 to 28 and 30, because of the resource to actually deliver just doesn't exist. Thank you. Dr. Timmy Hawkins?
Thank you. Very interesting to get the explanation that Eddie has given. I deal a lot with this sort of thing, and having EPC rating greater than C, frankly, is a lot more cost for not much gain. Yes. And I say that because the the average energy saving, I mean, if you look at an EPC rating, you always have at the bottom where it says, if you do this, you spend this much to install it, you get this much saving. Where you have solid floor insulation, for example, typical cost is up to £6,000, that is £6,000. And the yearly saving is £50. And you go, why would I bother? Yeah, exactly. And there's things like that. The other is the opposite, which says hot water cylinder insulation, 30 quid, you save £11 a year. You know, there's a percentage that you go, yeah, that's probably worth me doing than spending 6,000 to save £50 a year.
This is why I was asking. I think that piece of work done by the LGA, by the Local Government Association, was saying because of the minimal gains you get going above C to get to B or A, the higher costs,
Exactly.
it's not necessarily the best way to go is setting, you know, our targets above C. But I think within that C is what you've just explained, Eddie, which is which of those are fabric first and which of those are just renewable energy kind of options. And so that putting renewable energy where it just leaks out, you know, all your energy leaks out, just doesn't make sense, especially if this is in our own housing stock. Yeah.
But the fabric first is expensive. It is very expensive. So there's got to be that balance there. And you know, the requirement for the private rented sector to bring all rented properties up to C has been pushed back. The deadline has been pushed back, again, partly because of the, you know, recognizing that this is a lot of investment that has to be made. And grants, relying on grants, as I have found privately in my private work, is that the government announces, oh, we'll give you all this many grants. You try and apply for them, and you've got to jump through this hoop and that hoop. By the time you've tried to jump and you can't jump it, it's not there. A lot of grants have been returned back to the Treasury because councils could not, you know, give them out. And you go, what's the point? There's a lot of talk. I think we need to see a lot more action.
Yeah, and I think on the sort of, as at the Forum of the Future, which was about sort of both children looking at careers, young people as careers, but also that transferring of skills within tradespeople. So I don't know, Eddie, we've seen, but part of that lack of absorptive capacity in the market to say, yeah, we'll go for those grants, is that they've been short-term grants. And they don't signal the billions that are actually out there in the market that people would say, oh, actually, I'll move my company towards that because they're there. So it's this, and the LGA has insisted on this in councils and the district council network as well, that what we need are bigger, longer-term grants to enable, you know, to get the resource both within councils and to be able to subcontract that work in the marketplace. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've only got to look back when the solar panel industry, when the feed-in tariffs were sort of like 40, 50p a unit for feed-in, and there was loads of companies that sort of rushed into it. And now you try and find a company that will install your solar panel now. They're very few and far between because they've all gone bust and broke or just shut the company because there's no business sort of really for it, because the way the government structured the feed-in tariff, there isn't that market anymore.
Good. Well, we'll look forward to seeing the next update. And I think, as members have said, it's really, really helpful and useful for us to be able to see this level of the data that's now there in terms of that stock update, and therefore the evidence on which kind of decision making to base that, one, what we're pushing for in terms of the carbon emissions reduction, but also in terms of you know, well-being of residents. So thank you very much, Eddie. Yeah.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the other one, as I understand, is around planning. So just on planning for heat pumps, DESNES and DEFRA have just finished a review at the end of last year. Recommending that it may need to have a reduction in planning permission requirements around noise, because it's such that the noise levels means that every air source heat pump is above the recommended noise if it's not in a back garden, and therefore every installation requires planning permission. So what they're saying is that is a huge barrier at the moment, and I don't know if you've seen it within any of our properties, Eddie, that you've been doing this, where that's been an issue. But they're saying it's a barrier to reaching the targets for installations.
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly looking at our products. We've just, in regard to the air source heat pumps, we look at obviously the sustainability and so on. We've just moved to a different product, which is primarily manufactured in the UK as opposed to coming from all over the world. And one of the key features on the new heat pumps is to keep the noise as low as possible. And that also relates to sort of the type of servicing that it needs and so on. So if the fan gets dirty, they get them dirtier, they get the noisier they get. So it's all about those kind of things and keeping it clean. So with the ones we're looking at, that is one of our key considerations, is the sort of noise disruption, because some of the early units were quite noisy, like someone had them described in the past, like a jet taking off in the garden. So yeah, that is a definite consideration. We haven't had any real issues with it, to be fair, on planning side, but yeah, it is definitely a consideration.
Okay, good. Thank you, Councillor Jeff Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, because I was interested in this, I did a mini survey of the Larkfield estate in Great Abington, where every house has an air source heat pump, and I knocked on every door. Some people weren't in, but quite a lot were. Nobody was bothered by the noise. There were some issues about, well, sometimes it gets too hot upstairs and not hot enough downstairs, like these kind of things, but nobody mentioned noise as a problem, so that was interesting.
Thank you very much, Eddie. And so, members, I think what we can do is note with interest that update. Thank you very much for the detail in that, Eddie.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good, and we'll go now on to agenda item number 8, which is an oral update on the local nature recovery strategy. And we have with us Gabrielle Yeomans, who is the local nature recovery strategy officer at Cambridgeshire County Council. Hello. Oh, can't hear you, Gabrielle, I don't think.
Can you hear me? Oh dear. Hello?
Yes, we heard you just then.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Sorry about that. I'm trying to get the technology to work. Let me just share my screen. Bear with me. Apologies. There you go. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. And Phil, I think Phil Clark, you're here as well, so welcome too.
Yes.
Nice to have you with us.
Thank you. Hello. Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting us along today to talk about the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Local Nature Recovery Strategy. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Gabriella Yeomans. I am the Local Nature Recovery Strategy Officer, and I've got my colleague here today as well, Phil Clark. I apologise in advance if you've already seen this presentation. We have been making the rounds around different committees, but hopefully there will be the most up-to-date information on our strategy, as well as what is a local nature recovery strategy, including the responsibility of South Cambridgeshire as a supporting authority. So just a bit of background of what is a local nature recovery strategy. Local nature recovery strategies are a system of spatial strategies for nature and environmental improvements, and they're required by law under the Environment Act of 2021. The purpose of these strategies is to identify locations to create or improve habitat that is most likely to benefit nature. A local nature recovery strategy must include two components. We have a local habitat map, which consists of areas that are already important for nature. So that could be local nature reserves, SSSIs, etc. And then a statement of biodiversity priorities, which is our priorities of identifying where we can create or enhance biodiversity, and then the potential measures to go alongside them. It's important to note that there are about 48 local nature recovery strategies currently being developed, and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is one of them. And we will be, alongside those other 47, be connecting up into that wider nature recovery network. Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is one of the most nature depleted counties across England, and we want to respond to the existing deficit of rich wildlife sites across the county, as well as responding to the national decline in biodiversity. So just a little bit of information. DEFRA have assigned a responsible authority for each one of those 48 LNRSs, and the responsible authority has been assigned to the combined authority. However, they've contracted this responsibility to Cambridgeshire County Council, which is where Phil and I come into it. And we are also working very closely with our local nature partnership, Natural Cambridgeshire, on developing an LNRS for the county. So how are we going to go about developing an LNRS? So we want it to be a cross-county collaboration and drawing upon existing assets and expertise. We want it to be a really good, well-resourced stakeholder engagement activity, making sure we're engaging with a wide range of partners and stakeholders, and everyone has the opportunity to feed into the process. We want it to be the end result to be a document that everyone can get behind and is well coordinated, and it guides the shared ambition of doubling nature, as well as building on existing great work that's already happened, such as the Cambridge Nature Network. We also want to develop a governance framework that utilises existing groups, partnerships and forums. We also would like to link into other environmental incentives such as biodiversity net gain and ELMS. We will also, like to engage with our local communities and make sure that nature recovery is being led on the ground, as well as expanding on our natural capital opportunities and fully embracing those ecosystem services. And lastly, the wider environmental benefits as well, making sure we're linking into them, such as health and well-being, flood risk, and climate change. So the governance structure that has been set up, we have the Combined Authorities Environment Committee, and they will have the political oversight. We have our steering group that meet on a monthly basis, and we have representatives from the CPCA, the County Council, Natural England, Natural Cambridgeshire, as well as representatives from each of our supporting authorities. Alongside that, we have our production group, which is the core group working on developing the LNRS. Underneath that, we have our development group, which is a wider stakeholder group that we are using to ground truth and making sure the outputs of LNRS are being coordinated correctly. And then underneath that, we will be setting up working groups to focus on the different priority habitats and that prioritisation process. So progress so far. So we started in January of 2023, and I started setting up the project management principles, creating a governance structure and timelines. We also started our early on engagement with various stakeholders to bring them along on this journey, as well as understanding that baseline information that can feed into developing the LNRS. Then we move on to October 2023, where we actually commenced developing the LNRS. And we've got our 3 work streams here. So we've got our stakeholder engagement and communication work stream, which we have procured Natural Cambridgeshire to lead on. We have our data and evidence work stream, and we've procured consultants, Natural Capital Solutions, to assist in the GIS supporting role. And then lastly, we have our land use and strategies and policies, and a wider environmental work streams. And we have procured consultants, land use consulting, to review these work streams and feed into the writing of the strategy. So LUC are writing the strategy for us. So now we get to March 2024. We've commenced our stakeholder engagement work stream, and since January of 2024, we've undertaken a series of workshops and different engagement activities, such as expert workshops. We've had multiple development group workshops. We've gone to loads of different community engagement events, as well as starting to talk to our farmers and landowners as well, via different cluster groups that are dispersed across the county. We've come to member engagement sessions like today, and we've also started talking to particular interest groups. We've also we've launched in February our surveys, which I will touch on in a little bit. So then we have our data and evidence work stream. So Natural Capital Solutions have been busy collecting all the different GIS and using that to update our baseline habitat mapping. And then we have LUC, who have been undertaking a review of the different strategies and understanding that wider environmental benefit to feed into the strategy writing. So next steps. We are collecting all of our outputs from all of these different work streams and using that to create a habitat priority long list. We would then commence what we're calling prioritization process to shortlist what is our priority habitats and those actions that go alongside them. We're using the baseline habitat mapping that's being created to create our local habitat map, as well as supporting opportunity maps to identify where our priority areas are for the different habitats. And LUC have started commencement on writing the first drafts of the chapters for the strategy. So, as mentioned, South Cambridgeshire has a role as a supporting authority, and we, as the responsible authority, must take the reasonable steps to involve our supporting authorities and have regard to their opinions, share information with them, and seek their agreement for our consultation and publication. So the timelines you see on your screen today are our current timelines, although we do appreciate that we are currently developing a Plan B timeline for the case that there is a general election. So the most important date for you to note today is that we will be coming to our supporting authorities, including South Cambridgeshire, on Thursday, the 12th of September, to seek your pre-consultation approval. And that's your approval of a consultation draft before we go out for public consultation. It's important to note that in the regs and guidance of the LNRS that you have 28 days to provide your approval. And then a similar process for our pre-publication approval, and important to note that we are aiming for the 27th of February to come to all of our supporting authorities for pre-publication approval with the same timeline of that 28-day approval process. Before, I just also wanted to touch on species recovery in Cambridgeshire. So we have to consider species recovery in the development of the LNRS, and we're currently working closely with the Record Centre and local recorders to identify those key species and identify a species priority list that will be fed into the overall document. We have set up a species working group, and we actually have our first meeting this Friday, which is very exciting, which is to formally agree the process to identify those key species to be included. So as I briefly mentioned, we have a few surveys out at the moment. We have one that is for individuals, and I'm really pleased to say that we've had over 1,000 people respond to this survey, which is absolutely brilliant. We also have a survey for local groups and organisations, and then lastly a survey for farmers and landowners. And I'm sure this presentation will be circulated around afterwards, and we'll ask you today if you're able to spread these links of these surveys through your different networks. That would be amazing, so we can get to maybe 2,000. Thank you for listening today. It was a whistle-stop tour of the LNRS and how things are progressing in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. But now this is an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions or comments? Councillor Peter Fane.
Thank you. Very interesting to hear of progress on the project. One of the aspects, and perhaps the most visible of any local nature recovery strategy, they're not always the most relevant, is of course the degree of tree cover. And this is where the low tree cover in Cambridgeshire, and particularly South Cambridgeshire, for understandable reasons, rather stands out, not only in UK terms, but even, you know, average tree cover in Europe, 38%, I believe, here, you know, 13%. And I just wonder to what extent it's not the appropriate form of recovery, no doubt, in many areas. We wouldn't want to see a lot more of it, perhaps in our chalk grasslands or whatever it may be. But to what extent will the NRS seek to increase tree cover? And at this stage, do you have any idea of how that might be done other than through existing mechanisms like elms, which is starting to emerge?
I'll take that. Yes, so hi. So the local habitat map will identify priority areas for creating, restoring, connecting up habitats, and there will be a woodland group. So it will identify areas where woodland or tree planting or hedgerow planting can take place to increase canopy cover. And the way that it will be delivered is, so obviously one of the mechanisms for delivering new woodland, new hedgerows is through BNG. So where appropriate, the right tree in the right place, the strategy will identify where the most appropriate place to plant trees, hedgerows, woodlands will be. And as you say, to avoid planting trees on some of our best chalk grassland sites, which we really want to avoid. So it will go into it, and it will also identify these opportunity areas as to where the best place to plant trees is. On a separate note, one of the pieces of work that we're doing internally is we're doing a canopy cover survey for the County Council land holdings, and that will give us a percentage cover. And one of the things that we've thought about is whether we could reproduce that across the whole of the county to give us a baseline of how much tree, hedgerow, woodland cover we have as a baseline, and then for us to come up with a target that's evidence-based that will say for by 2040 will increase canopy cover from say 7% to 14%. So those are some of the things that we're looking at that will target tree planting in the right places. And elms will be certainly one of those mechanisms for delivering it, as well as BNG. And there's also grants coming through from central government all the time around tree planting. We don't know if there'll be a general election, if we'll get a different colour government next year, but I imagine that some of these priorities will still remain then. So in the short to medium term, I think there are going to be grants available for directly at tree planting.
Thank you. So it was good to hear you that could potentially be from 7% to 14%, which would be consistent with our doubling nature vision and ambition that has been adopted in South Cambs and each of the councils up to the combined authority. So yeah, that's really good to hear. But to do that, and as you were saying, if we're looking at where nature is recovered and whether that's through BNG, biodiversity net gain for new developments, or it's through other initiatives, it's going to be an issue around land and land use. And that's where directly and indirectly our planning service as South Cambridgeshire plays a huge role as to whether or not there is land that could be allocated for nature, for tree covering, with the competing claims on that land, particularly with Michael Gove's current, 250,000 houses to be fitted onto that same land. So my question here is, in the House of Lords, it was the Lib Dems that led an amendment to the planning reforms that came out at the end of December that said that material consideration must be given to the LNRS, the Local Nature Recovery Strategy. So my question is, to what extent are we looking at that within the emerging local plan and within the Local Nature Recovery Strategy that you are preparing, that you're looking at? Because if we just prepare lines on a map and we don't have due consideration made to these within planning, and it's, then we have an issue, don't we? So I was just wondering if you could give us a bit of an update on that and what your thinking is around that. Thanks.
So at this stage in the development of the strategy, we're aware of that, and we're working with colleagues, so your colleagues within South Cam, so John Cornell, and others.
Present.
So present, yeah, he's lurking there somewhere. So that when we get to the stage where we identify the opportunity areas, that's something that will need to be fed into your local plan review process, which I think is due to start soon. So it's making sure that as soon as we identify where the priority areas are, that becomes embedded in your local plan, so that it does become a statutory requirement, as you said, a material consideration. So through the work that we're doing with you as a supporting authority and with colleagues like John and Alex and others, we are starting to think about how that can feed into the local plan, because that, as you say, that's the only way that it is potentially going to get delivered, and then it becomes statutory, that it's embedded in all the local plans. So yes, that is absolutely
Thank you. So all the work that you're doing and that everyone's done, and all of the work that's been done before on that biodiversity opportunity mapping, all of that and all of the work by locals and people who are answering the survey will only make sense if that becomes embedded in the local plan, which leads to the next question. So one is our local plan, emerging local plan process. The other is the Cambridge Development Group and potential growth group that's been created by Michael Gove. Also, do you have contact with Peter Freeman, who's leading that group, and others that would be beyond our democratic planning system at the moment, that looking to come outside of that? So, what kind of conversations are you having there?
In short, none. So, but we'd be happy to be put in contact to have those conversations with them. So if you could facilitate that, that would be really helpful.
I think it would be a recommendation coming out of this committee if members were minded to recommend that. Members, anything else on the local nature recovery strategy? I think we definitely will take up, and I think across our zero carbon community networks as well, I know that's already been used to, let's just, as much as possible, it's fantastic to see that 1,000 responses to this consultation, and this is actually, this is the grassroots kind of people saying, yeah, we absolutely want this to happen and be a part of it and recover nature in this area. So let's make sure that we can spread those QR codes and the adverts that you've got there as far and wide as possible, so that we get an even greater response, and from groups as well. So all of the groups and parish councils and things like that put that in. So that'd be fantastic. So if you can share the presentation so that we've all got those QR codes as well, that would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Karen.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that actually we've had a really big uptake from South Cambridgeshire's communities and members of the public, and that's actually been one of the largest respondents who've come from South Cambridgeshire. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that through your own networks.
We'll make it even bigger. So that's because it does matter to people, which is fantastic. Good. Thank you very much for that. And for that
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
So we go on to the last item on the agenda, members, which is the forward plan and any other business. So please, Alex Snelling-Dave, you can update us on that.
Sorry, I borrowed Matt's beside me. So just to say that this is a look at the forward plan. We have on the agenda some upcoming items. So I have noted down the ones that were mentioned today as well. In terms of the next meeting ahead, we've got an update on the Waterbeach Renewable Energy Network project. And we've also got an update on risk and adaptation, which I know has been moved from some previous committee meetings as well. So that's for the next June meeting. And then looking ahead to September, October, we've got some of those annual cycle reports, so around the Zero Carbon and Doubling Nature annual report and the greenhouse gas report as well. I've also noted that we will need to try and find a way to get that pre-consultation draft of the local nature recovery strategy to members as well. So it's likely to come within those meetings, but just dependent on the timings and how that matches up. Looking ahead, just say I've noted down the items around committees requesting an update on the air quality strategy periodically, and I've also noted the request for the council housing retrofit, kind of more of that action plan side of things, the delivery plan, to come back to the committee as well. If I missed anything.
Good, thanks, well done for picking all of that. So I saw that in the presentation as well. So is that looking at between September and October, we would need to see the local nature recovery strategy?
So that's a pre-consultation draft. So supporting authorities, of which we are one, will be asked to comment on or at least approve that pre-consultation draft to go out. So that's that point. Yes.
So that's so that'd be great. Get that somehow fitted into the agenda then. Anything else, members? Any other business or anything else you'd like included on the forward plan? No, thank you. We're 6 minutes over time, but I think that's managed very well. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And I think being over time was my fault for arriving late. Otherwise, thank you very much, everyone.